Good morning and welcome to this session. Thanks for joining. My name is Richard Martin and I work for a company called Wellbeing. We are workplace consultants. We exist to create kinder, fairer, more productive workplaces. And within that context, I look after our mental health and wellbeing work. And that comprises a lot of training work, raising awareness, helping people think about how they can be more supportive of each other, be more aware of warning signs, have better quality conversations. But we also work in more strategically in looking at the ways in which our organizations work and how we might be able to think differently about that and hopefully create healthier and more effective ways of working. I'll share a little bit about that later on. The main purpose of my session is to give a little bit of a personal story of my experience of mental health problems and to hopefully give you some ideas for learning from that. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is me, which is always a little bit difficult. I did write a book about it, which makes it a little bit easier. So if you're interested, you can always find out more there. But I'm going to give you a bit of an overview in the next sort of 15 minutes or so. So I am one of life's insecure overachievers. I worked very hard at school and did well. I got good A-levels, and then I went to a good university. I got a good degree in law. And then I got a good job as a lawyer and progressed quickly. And by the age of sort of 30 or so, I became a partner, which was quite young. I was also a father by that stage. I was married, had kids, and was beginning to get involved in all sorts of community activity. And so it continued. And by the age of 41, I had 3 young kids. I had a beautiful wife, lovely house. I had a very successful career. I was on the management committee of my law firm, and the plan was that my next job would be running the firm. So things were going pretty well. I was a school governor. I was involved in various other community initiatives. I was somebody who said yes to everything. And anybody who looked at me from the outside, I'm sure, would have said, he's doing all right. He's okay. And I guess it looked pretty much like that from the inside too. I was aware that I was under quite a lot of pressure. I was aware that I would feel stressed from time to time, but I kind of thought that went with the territory. Hey, I've got a big job, I've got a lot of responsibilities, of course I feel a bit under pressure. And I didn't really think more about it than that. I was aware from my work as an employment lawyer that there was this thing called mental illness out there. I had seen a number of clients who'd come to me for advice about their work situation, for whom it was clear that although there was a work problem and I could help them with the kind of legal aspects of that, there was something else going on for them, and whatever it was, I wasn't competent to deal with it, and they needed to get some help from a psychotherapist or something similar. So I was aware of this thing called mental illness and its overlap with our work, but I'd kind of assumed it was about other people and not about me, and I think that's what a lot of us do. So by May 2011, I am this apparently very successful person, and I went on holiday with the family. We went away for May half term, and I never went back to work. While we were away, on the way home, in fact, driving around the Périphérique, a motorway south of Paris, I experienced what I now know was a panic attack. At the time, I didn't know what it was. At the time, all I remember is feeling desperately ill. Suddenly, I was driving along, and suddenly I started feeling really, really ill. My heart rate going out of control, my breathing out of control, feeling quite sick. But worst of all, my thoughts being completely disordered. And all I could think about was this absolute urgency, this need to escape, to get away from where I was. So I stopped the car in the middle of lots of lanes of fast moving traffic, and I got out trying to get away from where I was. Obviously, that's not very sensible in a busy motorway. Eventually, they stopped the motorway, closed the motorway, and got me to somewhere safe. And that led to me being taken to hospital in an ambulance, where they tested me for a heart attack, and then they concluded that no, I hadn't had a heart attack, and they sent me on my way. And I went to see my GP in the UK the next morning, and he listened to what had happened and said, yeah, I don't think that it's a problem with your heart, Mr. Martin. I think the problem is with your head. I think you've had a panic attack, and I think it's probably been brought on by anxiety and potentially depression as well. Now, this was obviously a bit of a shock. Sometime a little earlier, for the first few months of the year, I'd been seeing a coach. And this was part of my sort of career progression. The idea that I could see a coach and he would help me with kind of my management techniques and things like that. And the last session I had with him, I remember quite clearly him saying, "Richard, I think I know you quite well now. And I know the firm you work for quite well. And I can see why the firm want you to be the next managing partner. I understand that. What I don't understand is what you want." And I looked at him quizzically to say, "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that question. What do you mean? What do I want? I have a team, I have clients, I have responsibilities, I have a wife, I have kids, I have this, I have that. What do you mean? What do I want? I haven't got space for that." And he looked at me very kindly and said, "Yeah, I think you maybe want to think about that." And I mention that because it feels like a catalytic moment. I'm not suggesting remotely that that coaching session was responsible for my subsequent breakdown, but I do think it began the sort of the destabilizing, if you like. It was catalytic in terms of bringing on what happened. So my GP, as I say, diagnosed a panic attack. And over the next few days, I began to get worse. So I had gone from being somebody who seemed to have no fear of anything. I could walk into any building, into any meeting room. I could call the shots. I was capable. I was confident. Nothing seemed to faze me. And in a very short period of time, I'd gone from that to being somebody who seemed to be terrified of everything. If the doorbell rang, I was hiding behind the sofa. If the kids made any noise, I was running upstairs crying. If the dog barked, I had to hide. I was terrified. I was really, really broken. And as I say, it had all happened very, very quickly. At the time, it felt like there hadn't been any warning signs. At the time, it felt like it came out of the blue. The reality is, of course, there were warning signs. It's just I hadn't picked them up. I hadn't noticed. But as I say, over the next few days and weeks, it got steadily worse. I never went back to the office. I tried for a few weeks to work from home, but that became increasingly difficult. And eventually, my wife and I went to see my psychiatrist. I had a psychiatrist by this point to say, "Look, this isn't working. We need to do something different. We, the family, can't cope with Richard at home, and he can't cope with being at home with us." So the psychiatrist said, "Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to be admitted to hospital?" And I said, "I don't know. You're the psychiatrist. You're the expert. What do you think?" And he said, "No, it's about what you want. It's about what you think." So I said, "Okay, help me out here. First of all, am I ill enough to be admitted to hospital? Because I didn't want to go there and be a fraud. I didn't want to be an imposter. I'd been an imposter. I'd felt like an imposter for most of my life. I didn't want to go to hospital and be an imposter there." He said, yeah, don't worry. You are definitely ill enough to be admitted to hospital. Don't worry about that." "Okay," I said. "What are they like in there?" And he said, "They're like you." And that really brought it home to me. So as I say, I'd kind of been aware of this mental illness thing, but I'd assumed it was about other people. And here was him saying, no, they're like you. It's about people like you, people like your friends, your colleagues, your workmates, your family. And that was the case. When I went to hospital, and I spent 4 weeks in hospital, the people in there were just ordinary folk who were having a difficult time at that particular point in time, just struggling with life. So I spent 4 weeks in there. I learned a lot. I'll come on to a little bit of what I learned. And then I spent about 2 years kind of recovering. And finding some sense, I guess, out of all that had happened. One of the early moments in the hospital, I remember very clearly, was we all went for a walk. A lot of us inpatients, we went for a walk. It was at the weekend, and there was a park outside the hospital, so we went for a walk in the park. And the nurse that was taking us with him had brought some bread to feed the ducks. And we came to a pond, and everyone started feeding the ducks. But I was a little bit nervous, a little bit shy, so I was standing off to one side. And then the nurse noticed me and said, "Richard, would you like to help us feed the ducks?" And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not able to feed the ducks. What I'm being asked is to help them. I can't even feed the ducks on my own. And I remember thinking, well, if I really am presenting as being that broken, that childlike, then I really need to accept that in order to be able to progress with my recovery. And there was a very real sense in feeling like I had kind of, emotionally at least, crawled into the hospital on my hands and knees, and finding in there a place of safety, a place where I could shut away the rest of the world and just focus on me, and at the very least stop getting worse. And certainly that's what it did, but it also gave me a number of other things in terms of kind of helping me think about moving on. I'll give you another example of an incident in a moment. But what are the things I learned from there? Well, I'm just going to share my slides again, just so that I can show you a couple of things. So, one of the things that I learned was this, and this is a very simple model that's used in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is just one of a number of different forms of therapy. I'm not suggesting it's the only form, or indeed that it's the best. It's just a form of therapy, and it has some useful models, one of which is this. Very simple. The way in which our behaviors, our emotions, our thoughts all interrelate. Our thoughts affect our feelings, they affect our emotions affect our thoughts and our behaviors affect our thoughts and our feelings, and so on, all different combinations. And we may not be aware of it, but this cycling is going on all the time. And very often what we find is that our feelings are feeding our thoughts then feed our behaviors, which unconsciously very often reinforce some of the more difficult emotions, more difficult thoughts. So recognizing, first of all, that there was this pattern going on inside us. But critically, these thoughts, and as I say, I'd been living a fairly high-pressured life. I had felt stressed quite a lot at the time. I was somebody who worried a great deal. And a lot of that worry, a lot of that stress comes from the way in which we think. And it may be that a lot of our thinking is unconscious, but nonetheless, a lot of our issues, a lot of our problems come from the way in which we think. And what I learned perhaps most importantly was this, that just because I think something, it doesn't mean it's true. That I could have all sorts of different thoughts going on, consciously and unconsciously, and they could be wearing away and causing me all sorts of anxiety and stress. And sometimes they're not right. You know, our brains are amazing bits of kit. They process huge amounts of data, and most of the time they get it right, or at least good enough. But sometimes they get it wrong. And what I think I learned was the ability to be kind and curious enough about myself to slightly step back from my thinking and to look at it, to observe it, and sometimes gently to challenge it and say, I know I'm thinking that, but is it right? Hopefully that makes some sense. What do I do now? Well, as I said earlier on, a lot of the work I do now is around helping people understand mental health and illness, raising awareness, helping people look after themselves and hopefully avoid the problems that I got into, but also help managers, leaders and others think about their roles in mental health in the workplace, how they can be more aware of problems developing, how they can have better quality conversations, but also how they can create cultures in which people can thrive, in which problems don't arise in the first place. And this brings me to another little story from the hospital. So on one afternoon, we were in a group session. So there were about 20 of us in a room with a therapist. And the therapist said, I'd like you all to stand up in the middle of the room together, first of all, please. And I'd like you, with your right hand, to touch the right shoulder of somebody who you feel quite connected with today. So touch your right hand on the right shoulder of somebody you feel connected with. So we did that. And then she said, with your left hand, could you touch the left shoulder of somebody who you feel you might be able to help today? So we did that. And then she said, with your right foot, can you touch the right foot of somebody who you feel might be able to help you today? And so we did that. And I'm now balancing on the tiptoes of my left foot, strained, kind of falling over, feeling pretty uncomfortable. And she says, hold the position. And then she slowly walks around the group. And she comes to me and she says, Richard, are you comfortable there? And I said, no. She said, do you often feel like this? And I said, yes. And she said, can you look at everybody else? And everyone else was doing what they'd been asked. They had their hands on the shoulders of two different people and their foot touching another foot. But they weren't falling over. They weren't imbalanced. They weren't in pain, in stress. She said, can you just ask a couple of people to move so that you can feel a bit more comfortable? And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, you mean we're allowed to do that? And one of the things that we're involved with at work is the Mindful Business Charter. And I just want to spend a very few minutes talking about this, because this is an initiative which I think is about that very point. It's about giving people the permission to ask each other to move a little bit. The Mindful Business Charter begins with the supposition that stress isn't very good for us, which is hardly rocket science. When we're stressed, our brains don't work very well. It's not good for our health, it's not good for our happiness, but also because our brains don't work very well, it's not very good for the quality of work that we produce, either for our own organization or for the organizations that we're working with. So stress is not good. And some of the stress comes from our own heads. And as I said earlier on, some of what we think isn't necessarily true. But some of the stress comes from our own heads. And some of it comes from the way in which we work with each other, within our organizations, but also between our organizations. And the problem is that because most people are good intentioned, we don't intend to cause each other stress, but we do. And then we don't talk about it. What if we could be a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more aware of the impact that we have on each other? And what if at the same time, we gave each other the permission to talk about it? Might we then be able to identify and remove some of the unnecessary stress that exists in the ways in which we work with each other, remove it, and create healthier and more effective ways of working? And that's basically what the Charter is about. It brings a number of different organizations together. We've got 70 odd organizations involved so far, but it's growing all of the time. And they are all committed to collaborating with each other, generally, and in the ways in which they work with each other day to day, to create relationships and ways of working and thinking in which we are a little bit more aware of the impact that we have on each other, that we care about it, and that we give each other the permission to talk about it. Now, there's an awful lot I could say about the Charter. I haven't the time this morning. But it's based around 4 pillars. Those are on the screen at the moment. The first pillar is openness and respect, the idea that we care about each other and that we are open to the conversation. What impact am I having upon you? Can we make this part of the dialogue when we begin working with each other, during the course of the work we do together, and at the end? That I respect the people I work with sufficiently to care. Think about how we communicate. So this is primarily around emails and meetings. So first of all, with our emails, before we send an email, think about whether we actually need to send it, or could we in fact pick up the phone or go and see somebody. But if I am going to send an email, first of all, try to make it make sense. Take some care over the content of the email. Do I need to copy in all these people? Just because I can, it doesn't mean I should. Think about the time I'm sending this email. It might work for me to be working on a Sunday afternoon, but what's the impact on other people if they're receiving my emails during their family time or whatever? So being more mindful, more thoughtful about that. Respecting our rest periods. We know that we need downtime. So why is it that we create this way of being and working that suggests that we're constantly on call 24/7? Of course, there are times when we need to work hard. Of course there are. But it doesn't mean we should always be doing that. So let's just be thoughtful about that and allow people some time to recover, to rest, to do other things. And a lot of that is about the ways in which we work between our organizations. But the final pillar, fourth pillar, delegating mindfully, it's about how does this work internally? And as I say, this is a growing movement of organizations who are committed to trying to change the culture of the ways in which we work. And if you are interested, then do look up mindfulbusinesscharter.com or email me, and I'll be delighted to share more information with you. The final thing I wanted to share with you in terms of what I learned was this, and it's best it's best summed up, I think, by this fantastic book that I think came out in the last couple of years. It's a beautifully illustrated book about four characters: a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse. The boy tends to ask lots of questions, and the horse is wise and answers the questions. And these are my favorite two extracts. What's the bravest thing you've ever said? Asked the boy. Help, said the horse. Asking for help isn't giving up, said the horse. It's refusing to give up. And it took me quite a long time to realize that I needed to ask for help, and I left it too late. I should have asked for help a lot earlier than I did. I should have recognized that I needed help earlier than I did. But asking for help, admitting that I needed it, was the most helpful thing I did. And it, of course, was the turning point in terms of, first of all, recovering from the depths of illness that I was experiencing, but also getting to a point where I was able to manage life again and interact with other people in a meaningful way. So having that bravery to ask for help. I hope that's been helpful. I'm conscious it's a bit of a canter through a lot of stuff. We've got time now for questions, and I'm very happy to answer questions on anything we've talked about, or indeed anything at all. But thank you.